we need more lay saints. And here's someone who lived a holy life working in a secular field. He was a journalist. And he used the platform that God gave him to promote the gospel. But he did it in a way that was different from the way a religious monk would do it, or a priest, or someone who is part of the religious life. Even different from the way a preacher would do it, right? So he lived the life in a way that made the Catholic faith attractive. People, even in his own lifetime, became Catholic because of their encounters with G.K. Chesterton. Some of them even before Chesterton himself was Catholic. So he was sort of a door to the Catholic Church because he made the church so attractive.
Hello and welcome to a special Parousia Podcast. It's special because we are filming inside of what's called the Parousia Media Room in Campion College, Sydney, Australia. And it's our first podcast recorded here, and I'm excited to introduce a guest all the way from the United States. He's the president and founder of the Society of G.K. Chesterton, and is none other than Dale Ahlquist. Dale, how you going?
Charbel, good to be with you.
Thanks for being. We met once before. It was only a year ago at the Catholic Answers Conference in San Diego.
Yes.
And you gave a presentation there at that conference. That was good fun, that conference.
It was a delightful time, and I'm glad that whatever I said compelled you to want to interview me. That was great.
Well, it was excellent just because, to learn more about, the idea of classical education, a bit about the writings of G.K. Chesterton. I've known about him throughout my life in the faith. I would say that. Didn't really know anything about him before I came back to my faith, but discovering some books, then discovering, wow, he's not just written a handful of books, he's written like 100 books and then thousands of articles and thousands of, he's contributed to so much. And I want to unpack a bit about him, but also a bit about yourself and why you started this society, what impact it's having. There is an academy, you're doing so much, and a bit about, you're on tour at the moment. So why don't we just quickly start, what are you doing here in Australia? What's happening while you're here?
Well, good. I've been invited by Campion College to give a speech at their Chesterton conference that's run by the Australian Chesterton Society. Carl Schmoody is the president of the Chesterton Society in Australia, and he invited me. I invited him to speak at our national conference a few years ago in the U.S. And I have been here one other time. I spoke at the same Chesterton conference 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah.
Wow. So we may have crossed paths without realizing.
Yes. And I'll also be speaking at some schools because there's an interest in classical Catholic education. Yeah. So I'll be in Sydney and Brisbane while I'm here.
Yeah, fantastic. And Chesterton, you are the president of the Society of Chesterton, and what's the website for those who want to know more?
Chesterton.org.
Chesterton.org, okay.
Don't go to Chesterton.com, otherwise you'll get hydraulic valves.
Is that right?
So you want to stay with Chesterton.org to get G.K. Chesterton.
Okay. Fantastic. Now, where to start? I'm thinking, Chesterton is famous for so many things, and your love for him, I want to get to that. Before you even discovered him, can we get to know you a little bit before we get into Chesterton's life? But yourself, are you a cradle Catholic yourself? A bit about who is Dale, and how did you then, I guess, discover Chesterton? So what was your faith journey like growing up?
I was raised in a Baptist home in Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, which is one of the twin cities of the state of Minnesota, north central United States.
Okay.
And I was the last person in the world that I ever would have thought would become a Catholic. And I think anyone who knew me would have thought the same thing, except for the very wise. But I was, a devout evangelical, and I really, if I was not subtly anti-Catholic, I was overtly anti-Catholic. Okay. So what happened? Well, I was a big C.S Lewis fan, and a lot of evangelicals are. I was reading C.S. Lewis in college one summer during my college years, and someone saw me reading the book and asked if I had ever heard of G.K. Chesterton, and I said I've never heard of G.K. Chesterton. He said, well, if you like C.S. Lewis, you'll love G.K. Chesterton. So that sort of planted the seed. What that planted the seed. But what really drilled the seed into the soil deeper is what he said. In fact, if you read Chesterton, you won't even need to read C.S. Lewis, because all of C.S. Lewis is in Chesterton. And I was a little bit, shocked by that comment. I thought it blasphemous. So then I picked up my first Chesterton. Well, then as soon as I heard his name, all of a sudden I started seeing his name everywhere. And in fact, I started seeing it in books by C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis was really attributed his own conversion to Christianity because he read The Everlasting Man by G.K. Chesterton.
Yes.
That was the book that really took him into the Catholic faith, because he was very much an atheist until that point. But he loved Chesterton's essays in the London newspapers and found him to be a very engaging writer. But when he read The Everlasting Man, he said it was the first rational defense of Christianity that he never read.
He never became Catholic, right?
He did not. No. And but as a result of him not becoming Catholic, many people have become Catholic. It's one of the great ironies of God. Yeah. And I'm a good example. I never would have read Chesterton if I hadn't read C.S. Lewis.
Interesting.
And,
so what happened there? What what was the first thing you read of Chesterton? Did you?
I read the book. I read the book that C.S. Lewis read, and the book he actually recommended to other people. In his private correspondence, he would recommend that people read The Everlasting Man. He said it was the best defense of the Christian faith he'd ever read, and so that's the book I picked up. And people, for some reason, Charbel, are amused when I tell them that I read it on my honeymoon.
Fantastic. So you're reading this on your honeymoon. You are practicing evangelical.
Yes.
You and your wife?
Yes, my wife was raised Catholic but was not practiced, so we were married in the Baptist church the first time.
Wow, there you go. And tell us a bit about the impact. Let's start with the impact that had. And very quickly, what is that about? I mean, just if you can touch on that.
Yeah, the book, The Everlasting Man, is split up like the Bible into the Old Testament and the New Testament, or like the way we measure time, BC and AD. So part one of the book is everything leading up to Christ, and part two of the book is everything leading from Christ. And Chesterton's argument is basically a counter-argument to his friend and philosophical opponent H.G. Wells, who wrote a very famous book called The Outline of History, in which he argues that man is just another product of the mud, and Christ was simply another man. And Chesterton's first point is that the humans are completely different from the animals, and there's something distinct about the human being. And he talks about the human story and how it seems to be a very focused story. And then when Christ steps onto the stage, he is a man like none other. And so he just takes H.G. Wells' main points and rebuts them in this absolutely fascinating and intricate defense of Christianity that's really the history of the whole world, and how everything that leads up to Christ is definitely pointed to that moment, but everything from Christ cannot be explained any other way unless he was who he said he was.
So I imagine you would highly recommend those who want to read Chesterton. That's a good one to start with.
No, that's not a good one to start with at all. But it's a good one to read. You should read it. But don't start with it.
Don't start with it. Okay, we'll get to that.
That's what I did, Charbel.
All right,
and look at what happened to me.
Yes.
I could barely speak. You can't even understand me. I'm speaking with an American accent. No, it's a very weighty book, but it's absolutely required reading. However, Word on Fire has just come out with a new edition of The Everlasting Man, and I wrote the commentary and did all the annotation for it. So it's a very accessible book. So if you're going to read it, if you're going to read it, that's the edition to read. But that's not where you start.
How many pages we're talking about? It's a big, thick.
No, it's about a 300-pager with the annotations. It's a thinner book without the annotations in the commentary.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah.
So tell us then about that impact it had. Was it during the honeymoon that it was moving you? And then tell us what transitioned to you considering even becoming Catholic.
Yeah, so I started reading that book on my honeymoon, and the other thing that for some reason people are amused at about my honeymoon is that these two Baptists were honeymooning in Rome, and I was reading The Everlasting Man. My wife was reading Les Miserables. And so that was the juxtaposition we had. And we were there, Charbel, the day that Pope John Paul II was shot.
Wow.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
how we spent our honeymoon.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we had this amazing experience of, since we were tourists on our honeymoon, we didn't know that the Pope was going to appear that day.
Yes.
So we were not present at the shooting, but we were nearby, and we were trying to get back to our hotel, which is literally 2 blocks from St. Peter's. And of course, it was mass chaos. It was just the sirens and just complete commotion.
Yes.
Like Rome usually is, except twice as much, right?
Yes.
And but then everyone just disappeared. Everybody went inside to watch TV to find out what the status of the Pope was. And we had the entire city to ourselves. We were walking through Rome, and the streets were literally empty.
Wow.
And it was romantic, okay? We did that. But literally, we crossed the Tiber that night. We walked across the bridge of the angels, and what we didn't know is that one day we would figuratively and spiritually cross the Tiber.
Yes.
So that's where it all started. Started in Rome, and Chesterton has
Amazing.
the first line of The Everlasting Man is, "There's 2 ways of getting home, and one of them is to stay there." And we had to get home by going all the way around the world to get home.
Yeah. How long was it between crossing the Tiber the first time and then crossing the Tiber the second time
It was
in an official capacity?
It was an interesting and long 16 years. It took 16
wow.
years
Okay.
of reading Chesterton, who literally
Right
escorted
through
me
the
the whole way.
80s and 90s.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly, right. And so I was received in 97
Okay.
into the Catholic Church, and but Chesterton was the one who first got me thinking about it, and who then led the way and accompanied me. He describes 3 stages of conversion. He says the first stage is you decide that you're going to be fair to the Catholic Church, and that's something that nobody is. Nobody's fair to the Catholic Church. You're either for it or against it, and as soon as you stop being against it, you will start rooting for it. You'll start being for it, and then comes the second stage, which is discovering the Catholic Church. Just learning all the things that you never knew about it. And that's the fun part. It's fun because it's like being in a foreign country. It's as if I were to go to Australia and hear a kookaburra for the first time. It's just exotic, right?
Yeah.
But the fun part is that you're not yet Catholic, and you can leave anytime you want. You don't have to worry about any commitment at that point. But then comes the third stage. Running away from the Catholic Church, because at a certain point all your intellectual objections have been answered, and you know what the answers are, but your heart still has to make a decision. It's always going to be an act of the will at the end, and an act of humility. And the convert enters the church with his head bowed, because he has to admit that everything he's believed before was wrong, and that this is now he's entering into the truth. And then of course he discovers, just like another convert named G.K Chesterton discovered, that the church is larger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Wow, very good. That's a great point. He was a convert himself, and I am curious to get into his life soon. But I do want to. I'm just so curious about yours. So you were married. Did you have children?
Yes.
During this time,
So
brought them up evangelical.
Yeah. Well, we after we got married, we had our requisite boy and girl, and so, our duty was done, right? But then after 60 years, we become Catholic, and then for some reason, we had 4 more children. So we have a total of 6 children. Yes.
Blessing, praise God.
Yeah.
So tell us then about, you've come into the church, that realization. You want to run away from the church? I mean, would you agree with those 3 statements?
Yes, I think
set up?
that third stage, it's absolutely right, because as soon as you start, well, I would take a look at the church a little different for the first time. Instead of just believing everything I've believed against it, let's see what the arguments are for it. And as soon as you start hearing good arguments in favor of the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
it starts pulling you in.
Can you whet our appetite a little bit? Just maybe one or two things. Was there something that, can you remember, let's say, what was the easiest thing to accept and what was the hardest thing to accept?
The hardest thing was Mary,
Okay.
because being an evangelical, there's just no place in our theology for that at all. And so that was the first hurdle and the last hurdle. Uh, we're also brought up with a sola scriptura, and so that's probably the easiest one to knock off. Chesterton says it's as if he says, I can understand someone watching a Catholic procession going by and seeing the bells and the smoke and the scrolls and the robes and saying, it's all bosh. But what I can't imagine and understand is why someone could see the same procession go by and say, it's all bosh, except for the scrolls.
Yeah.
And it's just an arbitrary decision on the part of the Protestant to say it's only the Bible and none of the traditions of the Catholic Church count for anything. The teachings that have been handed on that are not technically or overtly in Scripture, we must not believe those. There's absolutely no reason for that objection once you really take a look at it, right?
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, and then with Mary, as I said, we couldn't imagine giving any kind of reverence to this person who wasn't Jesus. And I think what happened with me, the way I overcame it was going and spending some time in some monasteries, because I was in that third stage of trying not to become Catholic, right?
Yeah.
That's what the third stage is, running away. You're trying not to become Catholic. So what do? I go and do a spiritual retreat at a monastery. And so one of the things that I read in the literature at the monastery is that, this monastery is named for the Blessed Virgin Mary because we consider her the model Christian. She's the model Christian because she carried Christ within her. That's what every Christian has to do. I said, okay, that makes sense. And also, she's the one who revealed Christ to the world, as she did. And what she did is that's what we have to do as Christians, is reveal Christ to the world. I said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. That was good. That helped. But then what sealed the deal is when I was at another monastery, and a priest, found out that I was in this third stage, and he just says to me, after I give my Marian objection, he says, well, do you believe that her soul magnifies the Lord? So he quoted Scripture to a Baptist, Charbel, and that's a hard thing you can't rebut that because it's right there in the Bible.
That's right. My
soul magnifies the Lord, not anybody else's soul. My soul does, and magnifies means literally makes God bigger. That's what literally the word means, and we took the Bible literally. So Mary's soul makes God bigger. I was done at that point. I said, I never thought about that before. I said, she says in the Magnificat, all generations will rise up and call me blessed. Well, did I ever do that? No, I didn't.
Yeah.
So that was how
powerful. Interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
So you make a decision to, okay, I think it's time to be Catholic. Did your wife journey with you during this part?
So my wife is one of the most perceptive people there is. She can begin watching a movie and tell you exactly how it's going to end within the first 30 seconds of the movie. She can see it all coming. She can see. We call her Cassandra because she always predicts the future. Always.
Okay. Did that start back at the shooting of Pope John Paul II?
Yeah, she goes, something's going to happen. No, she did. But the one time she missed it completely was when I said, we're going to have to start going to the Catholic Church. And she did not see it come, even though I'd been dropping 1,000-pound hints about how much I was liking Chesterton and how much I was leaning towards Catholic arguments. So I had to, I said, listen, you need to read these books. And she did, and she is now a very profound and fervent Catholic.
Wow. And what about the children?
The children.
How did that?
The two oldest ones were received into the church with me when I was received, and then we raised the other four in the faith. Yeah,
that's very good. Powerful story. Yeah, look at that. Now, just while we're here, because it might be converts here watching, or those who are not Catholic who are watching. One of the biggest, criticisms we have from many converts who become Catholic, the sense of the lack of community in many parishes. what was it like for you? Did you know where do I go? What parish do I turn to? And then not have, I guess, the social aspect or that belonging in a community that you may have had in the Protestant world.
Yes, I
What was
think
that
that's
like?
a very valid objection for many converts who don't feel that welcomed into the church because of the particular parish they might be involved in. And it turns out that God is calling that convert to start making that community. That's what the Protestants really do a good job of bringing into the Catholic faith is something that they had, which Catholics could benefit from.
Yes.
And I think this small army of converts have certainly added a lot to Catholic culture by their enthusiasm for the faith, and they're very eloquent in defending the faith because they know what it's like to wrestle with all those objections themselves.
Yes.
And I think whatever joy they can transfer to the cradle Catholic is a good thing. But I've been blessed to be part of parishes that are enthusiastic and lively parishes.
Yeah. Praise be to God.
Yeah.
Now, G.K. Chesterton, or the Society of G.K. Chesterton, when was that founded?
So we started the American Chesterton Society in 1996.
Before you became
Before
Catholic.
I became
Okay.
Catholic, I was on my way there, but all it was going to be was a literary society to just get more people interested in G.K. Chesterton and to get the people together who already liked Chesterton. And I knew that I already knew which road I was on, but it was very, very short time after that when I was received into the Catholic Church. And it was a very short time after that we realized that our real mission was latent evangelization. We knew that Chesterton was a maker of converts, and the more that people read Chesterton, simply they become better thinkers and more complete thinkers, but it would lead more people to the Catholic faith. And that's what Chesterton's a very dangerous writer. He's a very dangerous writer.
When you founded the society, was that a full-time commitment at that point, or was that just something that you were doing on the side? Did you have to leave a career? What were you?
Sure.
What was your career in this time?
I was a lobbyist at the time, and I did not become full-time running the Chesterton Society until about the year 2000, when I went on a spiritual retreat and realized that if I was going to accomplish anything, I had to do it full-time, and committed myself to it full-time, and God has been taking care of me somehow ever since then. So it's been 24 years with not knowing how we're going to keep the lights on.
Wow.
but the idea of doing a full-time ministry was completely life-changing. And so that at a certain point, the Chesterton Society itself became a Catholic apostolate. So we're recognized by the Catholic Church as a private association of the Christian faithful. Is what they're called. Yeah,
that's an official status out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so these exist in the Catholic Church.
Yes.
We have communities,
right?
Lay movements or communities. Fantastic. So, what does the society do? So, the Chesterton Society. What are the projects, activities, and if you can explain a bit about the work that you're doing.
Sure. Well, we publish a magazine called Gilbert Magazine, which is the best magazine in the world. So we do that. And then we publish books by or about Chesterton. There's a lot of his writings that have never been collected into book form because a great percentage of what he wrote was not written for books. It was written for newspapers. And then we host a big national conference every year, and we have a podcast. But the main activity that's taken over is when I helped start a Catholic high school, Catholic secondary school in 2008, and that led to other schools being started. Wow. So we run the Chesterton Schools Network, and that's become the activity that's taken over. The other thing we're doing though is we're promoting the idea of Chesterton being a saint.
We hope you're enjoying this episode, brought to you by Parousia. We love bringing free content to you, and we ask you to pray for us as we want to do more and more of this. If you want to help us reach more people, the key really is to get involved. So don't forget to subscribe, click the bell, like the video, comment in the video, and share the video. If you do all those things, it's going to increase the likelihood of this getting to as many people as possible. So let's make YouTube share these Catholic resources and content to as many people as possible. We're going to build up to that because we want to know who he is a bit more. Let's whet our appetite. He's a G.K. Chesterton. We hear about it. Let's start with what would be, his most famous, what's he famous for? What are people, if those who have heard the name, what would be some things? It's a bit like, you mentioned C.S Lewis, but
Right.
they might, I know the name, what was he famous for? And once they start saying certain stories and with Narnia or whatever else it is, is that him? Chesterton, what are some real popular, widespread writings?
The thing he's most famous for is he created the Father Brown character and the Father Brown detective stories. That's without question the most recognizable thing to any non-Catholic is that he's a detective story writer, and he wrote the Father Brown stories as sort of an antidote to the Sherlock Holmes stories, which instead of the super sleuth who's way too smart, who has an encyclopedia inside his head, Father Brown is the first underdog detective, the first detective who looks like he's totally outmatched, and especially because he's a Catholic priest, because what do they know, right? But the priest is the only one who figures out what's really going on because he's simply more observant than everybody else. And Chesterton's great technique is that he presents a truth that you don't see until he lets you see it. He's telling you what you already know, but he shocks you with what you already know. And that's what a good mystery story does.
Yeah,
So he takes that same technique and uses it in his essays.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to get some samples there. But how long is the series, Father Brown series? How is it?
He wrote 52 short stories.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All ages. I mean, can anyone?
I think
those up?
a young teenager who's a good reader can start enjoying the Father Brown stories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And all of his writings you would make available or direct people how to get them. How does the society?
Yes. So go to our webpage, chesterton.org, and all the books usually considered Chesterton are available.
Fantastic.
Way, yes.
Okay. Yeah, brilliant. Please do that, everyone.
Yeah. And I mentioned you said about the 100 books and the fact that the books are only a fraction of what he wrote. G.K. Chesterton was one of the most prolific writers who ever lived, and one of our projects also with the Chesterton Society is to get all of his writings available, and we're going to do it in a computer, a database that people can access. So we're in the process of putting that together. We're very close to completing that. Fantastic. And then all of his writings will be available through our webpage.
That's amazing. One-stop shop.
Yeah.
Have it all.
Yeah.
What can we touch on him now? So what was the time frame? Where was he from? A bit rough time frame, when was he born?
Yes. So roughly he was born on May 29th, 1874.
Roughly.
Right. Okay. Someplace within that 24-hour period.
Yeah, very good.
So he did all of his published writing was in the 20th century. So right in 1900 he starts writing for the newspapers in London, and he lived till 1936. And so all of his writings are the first third of the 20th century. And during that time, truly one of the most prolific writers, but mostly writing for the newspapers and daily articles of people. So he was famous because they read him every day in the newspaper.
How old did he live to then?
He lived till 1936, so he was only 62 when he passed away.
Yeah, so fairly.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing he young when he started.
Yeah, if he lived longer, my job would have been even more difficult.
Than what he's achieved. Would he have started as a teenager or an early 20s?
So there's some of his writings, pre 1900 that are available, but most of his published writings start in 1900. Yeah.
So mainly newspaper articles.
Yeah. And
what were the nature of those at the time?
They were usually literary essays, but they were on every different subject. So he wrote about everything. There was really no subject that he couldn't give you some perceptive perspective of, and so he wrote about literature, he wrote about politics, he wrote about the social conditions of the world, He wrote about philosophy and theology. He wrote about science too,
Wow.
and everything. And he truly is a complete thinker. So you can, as my partner Carl Schmoody says, he's a one-man education, a one-man classical education, because everything he writes about will form part of your complete education. Yeah.
Mate, how so his faith, what was that? Was he always a dedicated Christian growing up?
Right. He was not raised as
No.
a Christian at all.
Okay.
Raised as a Unitarian Universalist, so no creedal faith whatsoever.
Okay.
And he kind of had to struggle to find the Christian faith. And his spiritual autobiography is in his book Orthodoxy, which is another key book
yes.
that everybody has to read of Chesterton's. And Orthodoxy tells how he came to believe Christianity. And he said he came to believe it by reading all the arguments against it, and also by reading what the other philosophers were teaching, and realized that they were insane ideas. He said the modern philosophy would lead you into the nut house. It leads to the insane asylum. And Christianity was the only philosophy that actually makes sense and that answered all the objections that all the other philosophies made. But he didn't read any classic apologetics himself. He read literature and he read the philosophers against Christianity, and that's how he came to believe. And so he really becomes a Christian right around the time he starts writing, about 1900, 1901. Yeah. And then that begins a very deliberate and slow and intellectual series of steps to the Catholic faith.
So when did he become, was it towards the end of his life or about midway through his professional life?
So 1922 is when he became a Catholic. So he was only a Catholic for the last 14 years of his life.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious if that impacted the style of his writing in any way. What if you look at the works beforehand and after, can you notice any obvious style changes or
the answer, Charbel, is no. You can't. You don't see the big intellectual change, because already in his mind he's thinking like a Catholic long before his actual conversion. The only time there'd be a giveaway if he's addressing something specifically about the Catholic faith is the only time you might be able to. You could hardly ever date his writings.
Wow. Okay.
It's incredible he was all of a piece for most of his writing career.
No anti-Catholic rhetoric at all?
Only from some personal letters as a young man before he started writing. He'd make a few throwaway comments about it, because this is before he really understood anything about the faith. Yeah.
But when he was writing, so he's writing these weekly columns.
Yeah.
That's just week in, week out, doing that commentary, sort of almost, would it be equivalent to these modern day commentators out there on political matters and whatever?
Not equivalent, but like that's the best thing to, you don't know, some of the popular essays of our time, you don't know what they're going to write about.
Yeah.
And that's going to be Chester. You don't know what the next essay is going to be about. Yeah.
And then what about the book? So what was his first book? Was it a collection of his writings, or was it he wanted to...
Yeah, so his first books were poetry.
Poetry?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's also a well-established poet. In fact, one of his obituaries said he'll be most remembered as a poet. That's what the prediction was. So he
most famous poem?
His most famous poem would be Lepanto, which is this great defense. Yeah, well, that's Lepanto. Then
that's powerful.
The other is a book-length epic poem called The Ballad of the White Horse.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, that's a good one. So then his first real book was a book on Robert Browning, the poet.
Okay.
And then there were some collections of essays that were published. He wrote a book on Charles Dickens.
Yes.
And which I think is one of his most underrated books. And then out came the books on, defending Christianity, like Heretics and Orthodoxy. And after his conversion, he wrote The Everlasting Man. But he also wrote books on St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Francis of Assisi.
There you go. As a Catholic.
Yeah, as a Catholic. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. And every one of those books, the 100 of them, are available through the website now.
Yeah, I think we'll have most of them available on the online library right now. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, what are the other? So poetry, articles. We've got books, so on all different topics here, not just faith.
Oh, some novels are written in there too. He's got about 7 novels that he wrote. most famous one's called The Man Who Was Thursday, and it's a wonderful cosmic detective story. Another one, his first one's called The Napoleon of Notting Hill, which is the plot of that novel is a suburb of London breaks away and declares its independence from the rest of England. And it's set in 1984.
Wow.
So,
Any coincidence
yeah,
with someone else?
that's something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much you can say. What was he like as a human being? Larger than life character.
Right.
And
Truly, that's a
got
great
sense
description.
of humor.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about him. What was he like to be around?
So when you describe him as larger than life, Charbel, you really nailed it, because he's 6'4" and weighs 300 pounds, and it was jovial. He filled the room with his, not only with his physical presence, but with his spiritual, intellectual presence. People were just drawn to him because he was likable, he was lovable, and he cared more about you and what you had to say than what you wanted to hear him say. I mean, which nobody wanted to talk. They wanted to hear Chesterton when he was around, but he really wanted to hear what your opinion was, and he cared about you in the room. He would make the sign of the cross over the room when he entered it, and he'd make the sign of the cross with his match before he lit his cigar. And he said, some men write with a pencil, some write with a typewriter. I write with a cigar. So he enjoyed holy smoke, but he also defended the man's right to enjoy a drink in a time where prohibition was rearing its head. It had already come to pass in America. It was definitely on its way in England, but it didn't quite come. But he's fighting against a Puritan mentality, and shows that God gave us these great gifts to enjoy. But he said drunkenness is terrible, but drink is essential. It's one of mankind's oldest institutions. The time of conviviality and the long tales around the table. So he's defending a normal, happy, joyful life, which is under attack from every direction. That's one of the things that's so prophetic about him.
Interesting. So in his writings, he can see 100 years later what society is going to be like.
Yes.
It's what a gift.
Yeah.
What was the so who would be? So tell us a bit about any link, other profound writers around his time during that time. I mean, you mentioned C.S. Lewis. You were reading C.S. Lewis, then you're told, and unpack that. If you read G.K. Chesterton, you don't need to read C.S. Lewis.
Yes. So let's unpack that, shall we? Yes. Okay. Please. So Chesterton lived he was about 20 years older than C.S. Lewis. So he's got this influence on C.S. Lewis and on Lewis's contemporary Tolkien. Yes. But he never knew who they were. They were writing after him. Their rise to fame was after he was no longer alive, and they actually never even met Chesterton. In fact, Lewis said one of the great regrets of his life was that he never met Chesterton. He could have as a young man, but he was too shy a person to do so. So here were these two reading Chesterton, and he influencing them, but he never knew who they were and had no idea that his ideas were impacting them.
That's very interesting. So Tolkien was influenced by C.S. Lewis. Would you say that?
I would say that Lewis and Tolkien were colleagues. They wrote together. They shared ideas together. They criticized each other's writings. And Tolkien, of course, was the Catholic. Yeah. And he was a Catholic before C.S. Lewis became a Christian. And I think that Tolkien wanted to keep using the everlasting man to demonstrate to Lewis that the Catholic Church is the fullest expression of Christianity, but Lewis was content with his mere Christianity. And so Tolkien's ideas on fantasy fiction were very influenced by Chesterton's writings, and so that was the big influence there.
But two great writers,
yeah,
both you would say influenced by Chesterton.
Yeah, yes,
which gives us a very big insight of the impact Chesterton had.
Yes, and Lewis really did kind of mouth and repeat Chesterton's ideas throughout his writings. He gives them his own flavor.
Is there an example you can give us?
Oh,
Just putting you on the spot here, but
yeah, that's
there's
a good one. A good example. Well, I mean, the most obvious one is Mere Christianity.
Okay.
Is his explanation of the uniqueness of Jesus. He's just taking those arguments from the everlasting man. You know that Jesus is, he's either a devil or he's a liar or he's a lunatic.
Love that.
Or he's the Lord, right?
Yes.
And that's the argument that Chesterton makes, and Lewis repeats it.
Interesting.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's good to know that, because yes, Lewis gets all the credit for that, the screw tape letters and all
Yes.
that as well, but Chesterton being the one to influence, that's fantastic. Would you say, what did someone influence Chesterton? So who did he look up to? Who did he get inspired by?
Well, the answer is very surprising. The most influential writer in Chesterton's life was Charles Dickens.
Okay.
You were waiting for something else, weren't you? Yeah. No, I mean, Dickens, try to imagine my enthusiasm for Chesterton, all right? Well, that would be Chesterton's enthusiasm for Charles Dickens. He just... He wrote a book on Dickens that really created a revival of interest in Dickens in England. Dickens was starting to fall from popularity and fall from grace, and Chesterton's book shows this is the most human writer there is. His introduction to the book says, "Abandon all hopelessness, you who enter here," because Dickens is this writer full of hope and humor. Humor is a very humble thing, and so that's the thing that carries over into Chesterton's psyche is what he gets out of Dickens. But he got most of his ideas from great English literature, not from religious works per se.
Yeah.
He was familiar with the writings of Newman,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a couple of essays on Newman, and I'm sure that Newman's conversion played a role in Chesterton's thinking, but not to any high degree as you would imagine.
What is really it's striking me as I'm hearing you, how close together these great writers were. It's almost like the generation after generation.
Yes.
The legacy just continues, and in their own style and impact. I'm now curious. Fast forward 100 years, and if you were to think about what would people say in 100 years from now about modern day writers, and is it a different thing altogether? Have we got a lack of that talent? That was so profound 100 years ago, 150 years ago.
Well, yeah.
What would be equivalent today?
Sometimes people ask me, well, who's the equivalent of Chesterton today? There isn't an equivalent of Chesterton today, but there's no equivalent of Thomas Aquinas today either.
No.
God gives us one of these at a time, and that's the one we have. We still have Thomas Aquinas, and we still have G.K. Chesterton. But there are some marvelous modern, contemporary Catholic writers who I think will be read 100 years from now. I think Peter Kraft is one of those.
Yeah.
I think Anthony Estlin is one of those, and we're blessed to have writers like that around.
Yeah, good point. Now let's touch on, I guess, your own writings. So you yourself are an author. How many books are you up to at the moment?
I've written 6 books.
6 books. Do you know them all in order quickly? Can you rattle them off?
I wrote The Apostle of Common Sense on Chesterton, Common Sense 101, and The Complete Thinker. Those are the 3 introductory books.
Okay. Great to start with those if you want to learn
those
more.
would be the ones to start with, yes. And then I've written a book called All Roads, which is a book of Catholic apologetics. Also, my own conversion story is in that book.
Okay.
And then one called Strange Things About Being Catholic. It's another collection of my writings defending the Catholic faith. And that's 5, and I told you there were 6. So there's another one.
Not the one with Word on Fire.
No, the Word on Fire one is
as...
that's the Everlasting Man that I've annotated and everything. So that one is technically written by Chesterton. All I did was edit and write the commentary and everything.
Yeah. You have Ignatius Press have published 3 of your books, or 4?
I think 4. So the 4th one is the one I can't think of.
That's okay. We'll get the links below. We'll get
it'll come eventually. Yes.
And then the ones that are published by your own society.
Yeah. So there's the two I just mentioned. Then I also edited a collection of articles called "It's My Name Is Lazarus," and it's testimonials from converts whose conversion was attributed in some part to Chesterton's
That's
influence.
exciting.
And so we're talking about every form of Protestant you could imagine, but also Jews, Muslims, atheists, and agnostics
That's exciting.
who became Catholic by reading Chesterton. I remembered the other book.
What's the name of it?
It's a short biography of Chesterton called "The Night of the Holy Ghost."
Oh,
The Night
okay.
of the Holy Ghost, and it's jointly published by Ignatius and the Augustine Institute.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Excellent. We'll make sure. We do currently have a few CDs of yours. If those who still have a CD player, we even can highlight those. And you also did a series on EWTN. Can you tell us a bit about that as well?
Yes, I was asked to be a guest on Marcus Grodi's The Journey Home.
Yes.
And it's amazing because I was asked to do this probably a week after I learned that such a show existed. And someone told me, Dale, your story would be really good on Marcus Grodi's show. I'd never heard of that. And I had a vague idea of what EWTN was. I'd only been a Catholic for 3 years at this point. So sure enough, I get a message from Marcus Grodi saying, we're going to do a series on classic conversions. We want someone who can talk about Chesterton's conversion. And I said, well, I know someone who could do it, but I can't give him a very, good recommendation because it's me. But I'm a convert myself, and so I know him. Oh, he says, you're perfect. So I went and I did the interview with Marcus Grodi, and the producer of the show came to me afterwards and said, we have to do a whole series on G.K. Chesterton, just based on the 1 hour interview.
Yes.
And so that led to our first season of The Apostle of Common Sense, and we went on to do 7 seasons over the next 12, 13 years. And they were just a show unlike any other on EWTN or on television anywhere.
Yeah,
Just
excellent.
a really great dose of G.K. Chesterton that really did a lot to promote Chesterton's.
Excellent. We are partners with EWTN in this region, so highly recommend. If people haven't got the app yet, download it. You've got on-demand programming there, lots of free content on EWTN. The DVD home videos are still available. We still have those, but I highly recommend people get that. That's fantastic. Anything else? As far as works, writings, resources, what haven't I covered? So we've got poetry, we've got books and novels, we've got some spiritual classics, the Father Brown series. What?
Okay, I know the
areas?
answer to that question, Charbel. I'm glad you asked. Chesterton's writings on Catholic social teaching, which he called distributism. And that's a word that we have abandoned because it's such a confusing word.
Yeah.
So we now call it localism. But it's the idea of Catholic social teaching that to have a sound and just society, you need two important things. You need subsidiarity,
Yes.
which means that the things that most directly affect you, you should control yourself. But we also need solidarity so that we're working in conjunction for justice with our neighbors and with our fellow Catholics, even if they're not close to us. So the idea of keeping your commerce local and keeping your government local is the way to have a very just society. It has to all start at the local level. If we trying to impute anything from above, there's no top-down solutions. And Chesterton's very much against centralization and a remote control of what we're doing, in our own lives. So another book that I just was involved with was a book called Localism, published by Sophia Institute Press, and it explains what localism is. And it's a series of writers who've all contributed to this understanding. Anthony Eslin is one of the writers who contributed to the book.
Fascinating. We'll get that as well with Sophia doing great work. That is interesting. So he really has covered such a wide variety of topics. You couldn't say, he's not really a specialist in one particular area.
His specialist is everything, Charbel. Yeah.
It's covered. Now, just the idea of people, there is a movement now to sort of advance the cause of his canonization. So what can you say about his life? So obviously his writings tells us a lot about his thinking, the way he thinks about the world, his faith, his love for God, his love for Jesus, our Lord. Um, he loved to have a cigar. He loved to have a drink. He was very humorous. Uh, yeah, summing him up, as a saint. What other areas? I mean, what are we drawing from?
First of all, we need more lay saints. And
Yeah.
here's someone who lived a holy life working in a secular field. He was a journalist, and he used the platform that God gave him to promote the gospel. But he did it in a way that was different from the way a religious monk would do it, or a priest, or someone who is part of the religious life. Even different from the way a preacher would do it, right? So he lived the life in a way that made the Catholic faith attractive. People, even in his own lifetime, became Catholic because of their encounters with G.K. Chesterton. Some of them even before Chesterton himself was Catholic. So he was sort of a door to the Catholic Church because he made the church so attractive. He had something that other people wanted. I want Chesterton's joy. I want that goodness. I want that humility that's coming from a person who's obviously of superior intellectual capacity to me, but he makes himself lower than me. Those are all things that are very attractive about Chesterton. He gave himself 100% to his craft, and he also the reason he promoted this idea of localism and Catholic social teaching is because he wanted a just world. So he fought for justice as well as fighting for the truth. Wow. And so we think there's evidence of heroic virtue. We think with every saint, there's no way a saint is even considered until there's a cultus around that person. The Catholic Church doesn't say, who should we make a saint this week? No, someone has to go to the Catholic Church and say, we have a devotion to this individual, and we want the church to consider him as a potential being raised to the altar. And so there's a great wide devotion to Chesterton, and we think his work on this earth is still being done because of his intercessions.
So interesting.
Yeah.
The impact of his writings, how widespread was it during his time? Then after he died, I mean, you're talking about Second War happening after, and then 50s, 60s, 70s, the literature there in schooling and education. Obviously your work is an attempt to raise awareness of his works. How widespread? What sort of impact can you? Is it tangible? Can you say, wow, he's impacted all these different areas of culture?
I think one of the most obvious things right now, Charbel, is the work of the Chesterton Schools Network. He is the patron of these schools, and they would not exist without his influence. And they're all about the incarnation, but they're about Chesterton's incarnation of the incarnation. The fact that here is a complete thinker. Here's a model that we want our students to think like, and he informs our philosophy in these schools. One of Chesterton's great lines about education is that he says the student in a school today has to be exposed to educational philosophies that are younger than he is. So we keep trying these new experiments on our children. That's what we're doing. And what we're doing with the Chesterton schools, we're taking this traditional approach to education, the things that have actually worked, the classical ideas that are they're as relevant today, even more so than they've ever been. And so we're trying to make good thinkers again. And so that's Chesterton's influence right there in a very, very tangible way. But then there's all these conversions that continue to occur.
So we're really only warming up. We've still got a long way to go.
I think so. I think you're right.
And through this school network, how many schools do you know? What's the blueprint like now? How far widespread?
Yeah, so there's 61 schools open right now, and they've all started within the last 10 years.
Right. All in the United States?
Yeah, in the United States and Canada, but now we're getting interest from all around the country, including here in Australia. There's plans for a Chesterton Academy to open within the next year, but we've got interest now from South Africa, from Brazil, from Argentina, from Spain, from countries in Africa.
And these are elementary and high school?
No, these are only secondary schools. They're just high school.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, all that information is on your website.
Yes, it is.
Can we get that website again?
Chesterton.org.
Okay. Pretty straightforward. Chesterton.org. So I encourage everyone, visit Chesterton.org. And those in Australia, we can announce here, there is also Australia, ChestertonAustralia.org.
ChestertonAustralia.com.
.com, not
Yes.
org, .com.
Yeah.
And so we'll put that link down as well and highlight that. Wow. Thank you. This is great. We're only whetting the appetite here. All the links will be relevant in description. Can I leave you with, could you leave us with one final inspiration? What's your favorite Chesterton quote? Can I put you on the spot like that? Or
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask the question if you want.
So what is your favorite Chesterton quote?
I wish you hadn't asked that. But I will tell you one of the great Chesterton quotes, which we haven't quoted yet, but it's so marvelous. People will recognize it. But let's leave with that one. Angels can fly because they can take themselves lightly.
Well said. Brilliant. Thank you for joining us today on the
great
Parousia
pleasure.
Podcast. God bless you.
Thank you.
That was Dale Ahlquist, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Please check out the Chesterton.org Society and check it all out online. And please pray for him, his work, and even for the cause of canonization for the man himself, G.K. Chesterton. That's another Parousia Podcast. Like all of them, please subscribe, like, share, and share this content. It's all for free among your family and friends. I'm Charbel. Until next time, God bless.